Since the first session, I would say that even the inaugural session, Aroma, there's a sense of anguish, anger, despondency which has dawned on me, and I thought that Anand Bahal Sahab, coming from the other side of decision making, would at least try to inject some amount of optimism, but he also said that more things change, more things remain the same. I just don't know how to put forward some kind of vision for Indian urbanization which can go beyond this sense of despondency. I was listening to Partho very intently. As he was making the presentation, I was thinking of his rent-seeking model, and I was thinking, if I was a real rent seeker, what I should be doing? I should be really discarding my presentation and get on to some of the issues that he raised and you raised. But just to prove him wrong, I wouldn't do that. I mean, I would stay with my presentation. Nonetheless, I'm sure you have raised some amount of, some questions in my mind, so I will be derailed a bit when I'm putting forward my arguments. You see, if you look at the expected rates of economic growth across the countries of the world, you do find that that map of economic growth projected by development banking agencies for the next 2 or 3 decades are very different from the map of the level of economic development, which basically means that the growth rate of GDP across the countries are really not corresponding to the level of per capita income. There is projection by IMF that developed countries' growth rate will be less than 3%, much less than the global average, whereas many of the Asian countries are going to record a growth rate of 7% plus. Now, also 2013, the UNDP Human Development Report did show that the poverty reduction has been very sharp in the countries which had a high level of poverty. So the global scenario is changing to some extent in favor of the less developed world, in Asia particularly. Now, assuming some kind of a relationship between economic growth and urbanization, I believe that the map of urban growth will also be very different, and will be different from the percentage of urban population, because it's going to be higher in the countries where rates of urban growth, where the percentage of urbanization was less. And that's what is being projected. When ADB talks about epicenter of urbanization shifting from west to, north to south, to Asia, the urban avalanche is coming in India. Obviously, they're talking about relationship between the economic growth and urbanization. I just thought, let me start with the global scenario. What is the kind of projection that we make for India as far as urbanization is concerned? How does it work? Yeah. What I did, took the per capita income and percentage of urban population on y-axis and x-axis, and divided the 187 countries into 4 categories based on their level of per capita income in PPP terms, and try to work out the relationship. This is for the lowest category of countries, and you find that the explanation provided is 8% only in terms of a percentage of urban population being explained in terms of per capita income. Second category, which includes India, has even lower percentage of explanation, something like 5%. Basically, you have plotted these two. I tried to look at the growth rates of income and growth rates of urban population. In fact, explanation becomes even less. This is the third category, which is showing absolutely no relationship between, per capita income and percentage of urban population. It is only in case of the developed countries with 20,000 per annum PPP terms that the relationship between per capita income and urban growth is something like 20%. But then what I did, I put all the countries, this is African countries, I have borrowed from Turok. He shows again the same kind of, he takes a different indicator for economic development, regional employment density, and annual growth rate of GDP. He finds There's absolutely no relationship. But this is taking all the countries together, 187 countries together. I plot per capita income and percentage of urban population. Now here we are combining history and geography. You know, basically this would not have much significance in terms of contemporary policies in the Asian context or in the context of India, but nonetheless, here explanation is about 35%. If you take a linear fit, if you take a quadratic fit, it is even higher, 40%. If you take logarithms, it is going up to, again, 40 to 43%. But nonetheless, the point that I want to make is that it is possible for many countries in Asia, particularly in India, to experience a growth rate of 6 to 7% in the next 2-3 decades, and still it is possible that the urban growth rate may not go very high up, because it depends on the technology, it depends on the institution, it depends on the capability of the urban upper class and the middle class to practice and operationalize exclusionary urbanization, the capture of urban space by the upper and the middle class. These are the factors which will really determine the growth rate of urban population and not only the income level. Let's look at the data, and there again I would have to refer to Partho's graphs. Now this is, I just borrowed it from Devolina, and luckily when I took it the years are here. You see, this is the growth rate that is given by the line. Dotted line means there has been some adjustment because of the definitions. Now, the point that Partho is making, and Dr. Sivaramakrishnan mentioned in the morning, that if you change the criteria from 75%, bring it down to 50%, from 5,000 cutoff point, bring it to 4,000 cutoff point, what happens? I have done with the 2001 data. What happens? The size of the bars go up. Obviously, they will be higher up, but as far as the growth rates are concerned, they remain exactly the same. In fact, there is a dip after 1981, which is much sharper. I would just like to mention that if you change the criteria at one point, if you may change the criteria, 1951 figure will go up, but correspondingly other figures also will go up. So growth rates is unlikely to be affected, and as I mentioned that this has not been affected. And look at 2001, 2011. Partho has been talking about the new towns which have come up, something like 2,800 new census towns have come up, and he did mention there is a significant undercount. I'm prepared to accept that point. But I would like to mention that if you review the definitions of urban centers across countries as given in the World Urbanization Prospects, you do find 40% of the countries have used the cutoff point as less than 5,000. But another 40% have used it as more than 5,000. I agree that economic criteria of 75% has not been used, but I can tell you at least 25 countries have taken urban centers as given. They don't even allow any increase. So I'm not really convinced that the Indian definition of urban center is necessarily conservative. I do think that one has to look at the comparison across the countries. Non-agricultural employment in India with huge informal activity is different cup of tea compared to non-agricultural employment in any other country. You just can't compare density in India with, United States of America or in France. You can't decontextualize urbanization. But I'm really impressed that Partho was trying to interpret it as an alternate definition of urbanization. I would certainly like to examine these issues in much greater detail, and I may just submit for your consideration that if you take 2011, we have 2,800 new urban centers coming up, but from 1901 to 2001, the total number of new towns is 2,400 only. In one decade, we have 2,800 new urban centers coming up. You can look at the past data about the rural population, but nonetheless, the macroeconomic figures do not suggest there has been tremendous change in the rural economy to produce 2,800 new urban centers. Partho was referring to a paper by Himanshu, which does show that percentage of non-agricultural employment in the rural areas have gone up, which might explain, not on an average, every census has produced 400 new census towns. This time it could be 700. And let me tell you, Himanshu's paper clearly says that there is an underestimation of agricultural workforce. That's why non-agricultural employment has gone up. So I would think that the percentage of urban population can be anything depending on the definition that you choose, but the growth rate of urban population, if you make adjustment for the census activism, would go down from 2.73 to 2.5. Because out of 2,800, take 800 towns as genuine ones. Rest of them if you exclude, because they have come up. As Partha was rightly pointing out, there is no economic explanation. They are randomly coming up. In West Bengal, they are coming up at places where there is no infrastructure facilities available. It is just, there has been thinking by Jagdish Bhagwati, Arvind Panagaria, even Dr. Montek Singh Ahluwalia was addressing a group of statisticians in Kolkata and said, sorry, urban data is wrong. Urban data needs to be revisited. We are not capturing the migrants properly. Now, obviously, if that kind of a thinking is there, there will be some, there's a genuine concern among the census organization to say, perhaps we are making a mistake. Let's be a little more liberal in terms of identifying new urban centers, and that they are done before the census. So to a large extent, I would say that the growth rate has certainly declined. Now, this is rural-urban inequality in terms of per capita income. 70-71, urban was 56% higher. I've just made them equal just to show the increasing gap between rural and urban areas. This is consumption expenditure gap between rural and urban areas. The thin sample with dotted lines and the large sample is with the thick lines. You do find rural-urban inequalities to be going up. Given that sharp increase in the inequality, shouldn't we have massive migration coming if the cities are not exclusionary, if there is no capture of urban space by the middle class and the upper class? I would certainly expect very high rate of urban growth and also high rate of rural-urban migration. This is the data from population census. Unfortunately, Mr. Shiva Ramakrishnan is right, this data is taking longer time now to come out. Migration data will come perhaps in 2017 or 18. But if you fit a straight line, you do find percentage of migrants is declining. This is from census, from NSS. You find for the males, this has gone down. For the women, there is slight increase, and that's basically because employment opportunities in the urban informal sector, 60% of the incremental women employment in the urban areas is as domestic help. That has gone up. So I would think that the rate of rural-urban migration should have been much higher. Now, this is the graph which shows the top heaviness of the urban structure. Now, what I'm basically saying is that the present trends and patterns of urbanization does not give us the optimism that urban growth rate is going to pick up in next 2-3 decades. Now, is this what I'm predicting? Absolutely not. I do believe that this low rate of urban growth is not sustainable. It is impossible to have this kind of an urbanization scenario from the past being predicted into future. There's a quick back of the envelope calculation. Population has gone up from 1,200 million in 2010 to 1,600 million in 2050. That is the most conservative projection, from 1,200 to 1,600, which really means that we have about 400 million coming. Our present workforce is about 500 million. It will become 910 million by 2050. Agriculture and allied sectors have only 2,030 million. It can't take any more without depressing productivity and wages. I've already mentioned that the rural income is not growing. You cannot have this kind of a system which is sustainable. You have to take these people out. You are having additional 400 million people asking for jobs in 2050. Where will you employ them? Although present urban growth rate is low, rapid urbanization is required in coming decades to absorb the additional 410 million. Where do we find employment for them? This is the question I thought Aruna was raising, that when people are a little apprehensive about sustainability of urbanization, we have to answer, what kind of urbanization are we talking about? Are we talking about creating another 30-40 million plus cities cutting through the arid zones, or how do we look at them? Or are we thinking of a little more sustainable kind of urban growth? And that is the issue that I would just like to raise. I just want to say that there are two kinds of arguments. I won't take more than 5 minutes now. You see, one is supply side argument, that if you have big cities, the cost of infrastructure tends to be high. You are bringing water. That's what we are discussing in the morning before lunch, also after lunch, that water becomes expensive, energy costs go up, cost of infrastructure per capita is something like 6 or 7 times. I looked at the HUDCO figures compared to 50,000 and below and million plus. The ratios are very high. That's a supply side argument. There are also environmental degradation connected with bringing water and energy from longer and longer distances. These are the supply side argument. And recently, I'm quite impressed by the work that Ejaz Ghani has done. You know, Ejaz looks at one component of infrastructure, that is transport. He talks about this golden quadrilateral. And he shows that within a distance of 10 kilometers, the intermediate towns have come up. And where this quadrilateral is backed up by other infrastructural development, you find that the growth rate of the small and medium scale industry, which are land intensive, have been pretty high. And it shows that within this 10 kilometer two sides radius, the entry rate of the industries is very high. The profitability is very high. Capital output ratio also tends to be high. So basically, a case can be made of taking manufacturing sector out of these 52 million plus cities into second order and third order towns. That's the kind of an argument he puts forward only by looking at the transport cost factors. But I have a feeling if you bring the other infrastructure, this argument can be strengthened. He says northeast and south, east-west and north-south corridor also has that, but not as much as the golden quadrilateral, because that's where perhaps the backing up investment has taken place. I thought I will put the argument from the demand point of view. Also, to say that a dispersed urbanization is possible and is also, which is environmentally sustainable. I just looked at the emergence of the middle class in India. Abhijit Banerjee has done a lot of work. McKinsey has done quite a bit of work, and they are all predicting that Indian middle class, in terms of its size, is very low. It is here, it's 2 million, but there are alternate estimates made by McKinsey and also by NCAER, which puts it at 20 million or 30 million, but nonetheless, it is much less than Brazil, China, Russia. And the middle class is being defined.
Not 2 million.
India. No, this. I'm sorry, this is, let me first define the middle class, then this confusion will go. Middle class is defined as $5 per day to $50 per day per capita in purchasing power parity. It's a very, very high definition, right? The cutoff point is very large, so basically it means 40,000 to something like 4 lakhs. That is the definition which is globally used, and that's why we have 2 million here. Russia has 74 million. But what is interesting is, and these are the different definitions, as I said, McKinsey has given, Brookings Institute has given slightly higher, but more important is this graph, which says how it will go up. I have calculated by using income tax data, it will double. NSS data, it shows that it will at least become 12 times. McKinsey's figure is also saying it will be something like 60 million. This is for 2030. Brookings Institute says it will be 70 million. And the projection is that by 2030, Indian middle class consumption will exceed the middle class consumption of United States of America and of China. In fact, I was asked by COFAS, the French company, 2 months ago to tell where the middle class would be located and what are the activities in which they would be spending their money. These are the group of at least 1,000 private companies, and basically my analysis based on the 66th round national sample survey data tells me the following. If the total middle class, defined as I said, 40,000 per month to 4 lakh per month, this is household income. If that is their definition, then 35% of that middle class consumption is in metropolitan cities. Another 35% is in non-metropolitan urban centers. And remaining 30% is in rural areas. That's the point, Partho, from your table I was trying to get, that there is demand for motor vehicles, television sets, washing machines, and all kinds of cooking gadgets coming out of the national sample survey data in the rural areas and in small and medium towns. And let me tell you, this was a surprising thing for me. Per capita consumption of consumer durables is higher in the rural areas. Of course, provided you take, 40,000 to 4 lakh as the category. You find in the rural areas they are spending much more on vehicles, on consumer durables, electronic goods compared to the metro cities, because metro cities, that demand had been met before 10, 15 years. This is the data for 2009-10. Medical institutions, again, the expenditure in the rural areas is very high. So purchase of, as I said, motorcycles, cars, refrigerators, television, and all kinds of electronic gadgets in per household term is much higher in the rural areas, slightly smaller in the smaller urban centers, and metro cities it is less. Where are the metro cities population spending their expenditure? On rent, on transport, on teaching of their children, or medical expenses. Basically, metro cities are not spending in consumer durables, and I do believe that there is a demand for the manufactured products in small and medium towns in the rural areas. And why is it that the manufacturing units are not going to these areas? Basically because the present support system, I think Mr. Sivaramakrishnan did mention that the government programs also tend to divide the society. I think the infrastructural support has come in a way that the market wants it. If you provide infrastructural support to small and medium towns, to some of these centers, I'm quite sure the manufacturing sector would be very happy to go to those areas. There has to be infrastructural support, as Ejaz Ghani has mentioned, and as I said that there is a demand coming up in the next 2 decades. It should be possible to plan a more balanced urban structure in India, provided the policymakers really take this clue of the demand and supply factors and accordingly design certain programs. Thank you very much.